Can you please state your name?
Jim Corliss.
Can you explain what happened in World War II?
We won.
Can you say who was all involved in it?
Well, it's named the World War because much of the world was involved. Hitler had been gaining power in Germany all through the 1930s, and he decided he wanted to dominate Europe, and we stayed out of it, pretty much. Of course, England was very much involved because Hitler wanted to invade England at one point. He had everything else. He had Poland and France and the Netherlands, and our president devised a plan called Lend-Lease, where we would lend the English tanks and things to help them. But we had a faction of people in the United States that wanted, that war's over there in Europe, we don't want to be involved with it. And then the Japanese decided that they wanted to take over their half of the world, and they invaded Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Hawaii wasn't a state at that time, but it was a major Navy base, and we had no idea it was coming. And so the country was just outraged by this, and we declared war on Japan and Germany almost simultaneously the very next couple of days. And there's never been a war since that was totally so fully supported by all of the people in this country. Women went to work for the first time, built airplanes, learned how to weld, did all sorts of work in factories. Stuff was rationed. You could only get a certain amount of gas for your car. You could only get a set of tires every months and months, maybe years apart. I was a child. I don't remember the details of what my parents had to put up with in terms of rationing. My dad didn't have to go to war because he was a farmer. Number one, he was a little bit older than the younger people they wanted, but he was also a farmer. So some of the rationing applied to him and some didn't. He could get a little more gas, I believe, because he had to have gas for farm implements. But everybody pitched in. When I was about 8 years old, I went out and gathered milkweed pods, which were dried and the fluff was coming out of them. Mm-hmm. And if I gathered 3 100-pound grain sacks full of course, 100 pounds of grain, not 100 pounds of milkweed fluff, I'd get 25 cents or something. And this was used for life preservers. And so I was, even at 8 years old, I was involved in helping out the war. And people who had family members in the war that were in the service had a little flag with a star in the window. There was a blue star, and if the family member was killed, it changed to a gold star. And those, I can remember seeing those in many, many windows when I was a little boy.
Did you have any family members?
My mother had a brother-in-law, I should say, married to her sister, who was trained as a surgeon. And he went in. Of course, he never saw combat because his skills weren't related to shooting a rifle at somebody. But he did receive a citation for standing at an operating table and repairing people for something like 40 straight hours in one of the campaigns in the Pacific Ocean. And the United States fought the war both in the Pacific and in Europe. And as a Navy guy, he went to the Pacific, and that's where he fought his war. I don't think he ever saw a Japanese soldier, but he was quite close to what was going on.
Did it affect your family in any kind of way with the war?
It affected everybody. Probably our family less than many, because number one, we had no one other than my Uncle Wally who was in the service. The rest of the men in the family were all farmers. And like my dad, my two uncles were a little bit older, and so in addition to being farmers, so they never went in. And of course, I was just a child. I was much too young. But it affected us in other ways. One of the little things that I remember that just kind of indicative of what it was like. Soon after the war was over, in the summer of 1945 or the fall of 1945, my mother got a telephone call from the local grocery store, and they had just gotten word that they were going to get their first shipment of bananas. All the ships in the world were all during that time hauled war materials to the various battlegrounds. And after the war was over, there was a ship available to haul bananas. And at the age of 10, I had my first banana. Now, I'd probably had one before the war started when I was 3 or 4 years old. I don't remember that. But I can remember having a banana for the first time in at least 5 years when I was 10 years old. And that's an effect of the war that you normally wouldn't think of.
Was your family happy that the war had ended?
Oh, everybody was so happy. I have a vivid memory of going down to the village with my parents, especially after the Japanese surrendered. Germans surrendered in April of 1945, and the Japanese lasted until August. And when the European War was over, it was called VE Day, Victory in Europe. And then it was called VJ Day in August when the Japanese surrendered. And that meant it was over with, because when the Germans surrendered in Europe, we still had the Pacific War going on. So, but finally in August it was all over with. And in our little village in Vermont, everybody was out on the street, driving up and down, car horns honking, and just it was just a fantastic experience, just for a little kid like myself.
Well,